Your patience. We're going to start. There will be probably more people coming, but as you know, traffic Miami, right? So that is already a good segue into the topic of our day or our evening. My name is Marcus Thiel. I'm associate professor for European politics at the Florida International University, and also the EU Center Director. And with Christine Kali, that many of you know, basically we run a lot of the EU-directed activities. And so within that framework, I have the pleasure to welcome all of you and to our very interesting talk by our expert Alberto Terenzi, which I'll mention in a second. I will introduce him in a second. In case you're wondering about that noise, these are 3D printers. So after this talk, in about 1 hour, 15 minutes, we'll have a reception over there. But also you're welcome to check out some of the 3D printers, and they're really fantastic, and they're very special, that lab that we have over here. But this is not really the topic of the day. Today, you came here and we'll organize this event, which is, by the way, funded by the European Union. In an attempt to provide visibility under sort of more difficult transatlantic relations nowadays, as you can imagine. So we got this funding from the European Union grant, which is a public diplomacy grant that involves talks on resilience issues as well as cultural events. For example, in May, on Thursdays, we plan right now to have movie screenings at the New World Center's Wallcast, together with the various European consulates. So we have a lot coming up. So in case you're interested, please give us your email, which we probably have already at the signing table, and follow what we're doing. Now, for today's topic, can cities thrive in the face of climate change? A European perspective, we wanted to have a European resilience speaker and basically engage in sort of a conversation about what are European experiences, given that Miami is really sort of at the forefront of climate change. As many of you know, if you've been around here in the fall during full moon and it rains, right, you can basically swim to your next restaurant or bar. So we really do have an issue. And now, at least we see all the taxpayer bonds, public bonds that are being basically put on the citizens to raise street levels, to build in the pumps. So I think it really is helpful for us to engage in a sort of transatlantic dialogue. Can you all hear me also in the back? Thank you, appreciate it. But before I do that, I want to thank our many co-sponsors. In particular, of course, our various European consulates, the Consulate of France, the Consulate of Germany, the Consulate General of Italy, and the Consulate General of the Kingdom of Netherlands, as well as the various business chambers, the US-Spain Business Chamber, the Italy-America Business Chamber, the French-American Business Chamber, and the German-American ones. In addition, I want to also recognize our special guests here, which help us, particularly in the area of resilience. That is Professor Mike Sukop. Thank you very much, Mike, for helping always out. Professor Todd Grohl, thanks, Todd. And Professor Tiffany Truck. So Tiffany, she is not here.
Not yet.
Yeah? Yes, exactly. She will maybe come. And also our director, John Stewart. John, thank you so much for being a great. Thank you very much for helping us run this place. Together with his wonderful assistant, Leon. Thank you, Leon. Yes, last but not least, I want to recognize, of course, my right hand, Christine, who runs the show, basically. I'm just a wrong person. And thank you, Christine. And our wonderful student assistants, Cynthia, Carlos, and Rosa Maria. So thank you very much for having us. Thank you. Now, without further ado, and I hope I didn't forget anyone, without further ado, I want to introduce Alberto Terenzi. Alberto is an expert on climate adaptation and resilience, and has an extensive track record of supporting the development of particularly urban resilience. Because as you can imagine, we wanted to get somebody who's familiar with resilience in urban settings, because it has its own issues that we'll talk about in a second. From 2011 to 2017, he worked for ICLEI, which is Local Governments for Sustainability, the leading global network of more than 1,500 cities across the globe committed to building a sustainable future. At ICLEI, he managed several European projects focused on supporting climate-resilient decision-making, creating peer-to-peer, city-to-city, region-to-region exchanges, and knowledge management platforms to foster knowledge brokerage between science and policy. Through 2015, Alberto acted as a consultant to the city of Rome for them to get into the 100 Resilient Cities project. And I believe Miami is also part of the 100 Resilient Cities. Miami Beach probably is also. So wonderful. So at least we have that commonality to begin with. Specifically, he was the city's strategic partner and advised them on developing their preliminary resilience assessment. Alberto participated in a number of EU-funded projects, which both created scientific evidence and tools to support resilient and climate-adaptive policymaking in cities. Currently, he lives in Berlin, and where he works as a freelance consultant. Thank you very much for Alberto coming, and welcome. So I'll hand it over to you, so you can maybe say a few welcome words. By the way, sorry, Mike, do you want to say some?
I don't think it's necessary.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank the Jean Monnet Center of Excellence for this invitation. I'm very excited to be here and to really just talk about the work that I've done in the past years in Europe to you and to share some of the main trends in the European resilience-making process and some experiences from cities. So I'm very excited about that. Thanks a lot for having me.
Thank you for coming. So Alberto, I don't know if you know this, but he has to basically visit FAU tomorrow, and then he's going to give the same talk, and then he goes to University of Central Florida, Orlando, the next day, gives the same talk, and then to Tampa, University of South Florida. So he has quite a program.
It's my resilience tour.
His own personal resilience tour, yeah. But let's get to the topic, because I'm sure we have lots to talk about. So as scientists have obviously found that, we do have a emissions problem, right? And that climate has already changed at least 1% plus. But the Paris Agreement, the UN-sponsored Paris Agreement, asks to limit emissions at a maximum of 2 degrees Celsius over the current standard. What makes cities particularly vulnerable in that setting?
Thank you, thanks a lot. Yes, there is evidence that climate change is happening. We have 1 degree already over, and as you said, the Paris Agreement urges us to be well below the 2 degrees threshold. Otherwise, catastrophic consequences will happen. And we see that catastrophic consequences are already happening, and especially in cities. And why cities are so vulnerable is because they are, first of all, the places where the majority of the global population lives. Currently, more than 50% of the global population lives in cities, in urban areas. And if we look at the European data, it's 70% already. And this figure is also bound to increase globally. Cities also produce a lot of the global GDP. So yeah, 100 of the biggest cities in the world produce more than 50% of the global GDP. And cities are very complex systems. Cities are systems in which, in a very limited space, a lot of people live. There is critical infrastructure which empowers these people to just carry on their lives, their daily lives, and this critical infrastructure has to work for them. But as we are seeing, there are many impacts coming from climate change which are threatening this infrastructure and making it, creating damage in cities and making the life of citizens more difficult. By the way, cities are also the source of the problem if you think that they produce 75% of the global CO2 emissions. So they also have to be the solution. Okay, Christine, is telling me to stand up. Looking at some of the climate change impacts in Europe, we find a lot. And this is just an overview, which is divided in climatic zones. But basically what we see consistently is that some of the main hazards are sea level rise, which I know that you also share here, increased rainfalls, heavy rainfall events, and intense and prolonged periods of heat, so heat waves. These are the main impacts that are felt by cities worldwide. So this is Europe, and actually I put in also a kind of climatic projection of the US, which shows that from here to 2100, the same hazards are going to impact Florida also. So We see already the consequences of climate change in cities. Just to give you a few slides on disasters, just to start on a positive note. This is Copenhagen in 2011. There was a huge cloudburst that basically created 6 billion of damage. Then if we go again in 2015 in the UK, Manchester was underwater completely. It was a lot of economic damage in the city too. And then Paris, 2016-2017 in June, the river hit the 6-meter level. Like, all of this is supposed to be sidewalks for people. It's not supposed to be a swimming pool. And in the Netherlands, in the same period, 20 million euro across the country due to flooding events. And I put also Sandy in New York, which caused like also a major blackout and resulted in a lot of damages. So cities have to deal with a lot of risks. And I just want to say that risk is a complex concept because it's about the events that happen due to climate change, but it's also about the vulnerability of the cities. Because you cannot, I mean, we should actually fight climate change, but a degree of climate change is already happening. We cannot do anything about it for the moment, but also the vulnerability is about where the socioeconomic most vulnerable assets and populations are placed in the urban space and how we can protect those assets. And we have to be careful when protecting assets because I want to tell you a little story about this university. This is a university in Colombia. It is a Catholic, fairly wealthy university, and this university was flooded once. So they have, as I said, they're wealthy, so they called the Dutch engineers to build huge walls around the university so that when the next heavy rainfall come, they wouldn't be affected. And it worked. But downstream, this informal community, which is inhabited by poor people, happened to be there. So basically, they mitigated the risk for themselves, but they just transferred it right on to a community which had much less means to then bounce back and recover from the disaster. And when I say that we have to be careful about risks, it's also because they can lead to unintended consequences. These are some sacred paintings that were in some of the houses, and I'm really sure that the Catholic University didn't want to flood a painting of Jesus, but that's why we have to be careful when we plan for risks in cities. So I think this is really a reality, and we have to do something about it.
Is that Javier on it? Is that the university, Javier on it? Javier on
I can't remember the name of it.
So you know it, yeah. Thank you. Thank you. We've been talking about resilience, announcing it, but resilience is a term that is being thrown around and used a lot these days, right? Just like sustainability was maybe 5 to 10 years ago. So let's try to define, if you can define a little bit more what resilient means, what resilience particularly means in urban setting, right? And I think you said something already about bouncing back, so that sounds already pretty close.
Yeah. First of all, I just want to say that sustainability is not dead. Like, we have to remember that, because sustainability is still a concept that has a lot to say and give, because it is the only concept that also takes into account the present and future generations, and it has a local and global focus. So resilience is also a very good concept, but it's more systemic in the sense that it refers to a system, which is a city in this case, but it doesn't have that global stretch immediately. But it is still a very good concept, and I've taken, there are many definitions out there. So I've taken one from a project called Smart Mature Resilience, which I participated in. And the project defines resilience as the ability of a city or a region to resist, absorb, adapt to, and recover from acute shocks and chronic stresses, to keep critical services functioning, and to monitor and learn from ongoing processes through city and cross-regional collaboration, to increase adaptive capacity and strengthen preparedness by anticipating and appropriately responding to present and future challenges. And there are a number of things that I like about this definition. First of all, I like that it describes two parts of the concept of resilience. One part is a very, say, almost passive quality, which is the ability to bounce back, like the ability to absorb a shock, to absorb a catastrophic event. But actually, it points at the real meaning of the term when we talk about urban planning, which is this proactive endeavor that cities have to do to learn from what has happened before and to anticipate what is going to happen in the future. And that means research, data, it means long-term planning, it means, in the end, it means deciding over the shape of a city in the future. It means deciding today how Miami or any other city is going to look like in 2030 or 2050. So it's about taking the right decisions now and taking informed decisions. And for me, resilience really means transformation. And I just want to show you these slides to illustrate. So you will see the term climate adaptation a lot in this presentation, because in the European debate, climatic resilience is often referred to as climate adaptation. So I will use these two terms interchangeably. And there are different types of adaptation. Coping adaptation is just about coping with the situation. There's a flooding, you can buy a boat, you don't sink, it's great. But this is not going to prevent you from having the same damage the next time. This is going to happen. Then there is incremental adaptation, so you can put a barrier between you and the flooding, but that is going to only protect you up to a certain level of risk, and if the risk increases, then basically you're screwed again. And then there is transformative adaptation, and this is about changing the shape of the city and trying to harvest the co-benefits that come with adapting to the consequences of climate change. So it's not only about reflecting upon what is going to happen to a system, but it is also about reflecting upon what we want a city to look like for the whole community. Like, how can we create co-benefits around protecting assets, people, and the economy in the end. So I really like very much this concept and like this nuance of resilience, its transformative potential.
Thank you very much. I think that's an important distinction. If you want to sit down for a second to rest. So, I mean, part of why we brought you in is because you're a European expert on resilience, right? And we wanted to have this transatlantic comparison and engagement with you. So, what's your judgment, what do you think about sort of the European state of resilient, transformative adaptation of cities, right? Has there been substantial financial investment? Has there been, human resources and knowledge transfer amongst the cities? Are European cities, or to what degree are European cities resilient?
Yes, there has been. This is just a history of the main resilience-related projects and initiatives in Europe. So there has been investment in resilience. It's fairly recent. Like before, the European agenda was all about climate mitigation, so about installing renewable energy and making our cities more energy efficient, which is very important because that's tackling the problem. But then, of course, the European Commission started to see that it's great to do that, but we're not going to act on time. So in 2010, 2011, the first projects related to climate adaptation were started. And I was part of one which was called EU Cities Adapt. It was in 2011 and 12, and it was the first EU project that delivered an 8-month training to 21 European cities on how to plan for adaptation. And starting from then, there were many initiatives. So very importantly, in 2013, the EU adopted an adaptation strategy for the European Union. And that had a lot of actions foreseen, and there were some very important actions for cities. For example, it prescribed that national adaptation strategies be adopted in each of the 28, soon to be 27, unfortunately, EU member states. And it foresaw that LIFE financing, LIFE is a program that was used for environmental project, was also extended to climate adaptation. It foresaw that research be done on the links between infrastructure protection and resilience and the insurance sector. And it also foresaw investments on infrastructure and resilience in the economy. So there was really a boost for resilience in Europe. And actually, it also leveraged on an initiative that already existed and was called the Covenant of Mayors. The Covenant of Mayors was an initiative founded in 2008, and it was an initiative for cities to reduce their emissions by 20% by 2020. So it was a voluntary commitment that cities could take, and they created a parallel initiative in 2014 called Mayors Adapt, so that cities could also start working on that policy agenda. And now with the new framework program, which is called Horizon 2020, this is a framework program for financing innovation and research until 2020. There is a lot of money invested in resilience. Only for the 2 years from 2018 to 2020, it is 3.3 billion euro for resilience projects. So there has been substantial investment, and the agenda is starting to pick up. And there are also resources created. For example, this is something that can also be relevant for you in Miami. This is called the Climate Adapt platform, and it's meant to be the one-stop shop for climate adaptation in Europe. So in here, you will find all of the materials produced by EU projects, the regulations produced by the Commission, everything around urban adaptation. It's a library, and it also has a methodology for moving from the starting point to implementation and to monitoring of adaptation and resilience. So it's a very powerful tool for cities. And as I mentioned, the Mayors Adapt initiative has later then been merged with the Covenant of Mayors, with the first part on energy, and it's now the global Covenant of Mayors for climate and energy. So it was a European initiative first, and now it's been made global, which is the reason why I mentioned it here, because I don't know if Miami is part of that already, but if not, I really suggest that you look into it, because there is a big network of cities already taking part, and they also offer resources, guidelines, tools that every city can use to become more resilient. That said, the situation remains scattered and patchy, because there are a lot of resources produced, but still climate adaptation and resilience are new agendas in the city policy making. They are difficult to grasp for local politicians for many reasons. First of all, because they are not sectoral. Resilience is not a sectoral agenda. Basically, resilience means taking into account all of the sectors of city government, like public works, environment and energy, health, transportation, all of these sectors, and trying to make them climate-proof. So it really challenges the way that policy making has been conducted so far in cities. I mean, at least in Europe, cities used to have each department minding their own business, talking sporadically when necessary, but basically implementing sectoral policies. And this challenges the very essence of that. Also, it's very difficult to monitor the exact benefits of a resilient policy, like understanding how much an investment in a big infrastructural project is going to benefit. In economic terms, it's very difficult because there are a lot of externalities. I mean, what's the price of one safe life? What's the price of like people having more quality of life? Putting a number of that is very, very difficult. And in one project, the Ramses project, the London School of Economics has tried that and has done that to a certain extent, but it still remains undefined. So I would say that there are some cities that have done some amazing things. One of them is Rotterdam. I'm going to show you their example later. But we're still talking in hundreds, like 150 cities in Europe. Europe has like thousands of cities. So there are many cities that are starting to work on resilience now, and they are starting to plan, they are starting to carry out vulnerability assessment, they're starting to really understand what the risks are in resilience. This is also not always easy, because you have to understand what is happening now and what is going to happen in the future. So you need projections, you need data. It is a complex constellation. Still, it has improved a lot over the past years, and I mentioned this Ramses project. It's a EU research project, and it produced several resources for cities, and one of the resources that it produced is a collection of videos, a platform of videos by resilience experts that would give advice to cities. So I would like to now call in Luca Lermansen from the city of Copenhagen. Copenhagen is one of the front-running cities of resilience in Europe, and she is the head of program for resilient and sustainable city, to give us advice on how they did it and what's important for cities to start working on resilience. So I have a video. So this is from a platform called On Urban Resilience, and you will find many other videos there. And that's
adaptation is really contextual. I mean, the way you are is really different. But I think, first of all, I mean, you have to get an idea of the impact. And maybe not be so concerned. A lot of people, cities seem to be very concerned about the climate modeling. How can you, if you downscale the IPCC models, how will this affect us? But try and be not be too hung up on those things, but look at what are the trends that you are seeing in climate change for your region, for your city, and look at how you can work with that within your city. You need to have a strong support to do something as expensive as that, and also something that will really affect and change the way the city looks and works. So you have to be able to communicate this to your political level and to your administrational level, both in the city and in the water utility, to come across with the fact this is a good business case, this can actually work. And once you've got that back up, it's important to really keep it. And of course, I must say, I mean, we are not magic people here. Having 3 cloudbursts in 4 years' time also helps. Things like movies and good graphic communication is important. It is actually quite a complicated thing that we're doing. So we need to work on trying to explain this in a way where it becomes really understandable. And I'm not talking about talking down to politicians or other people, but actually trying to explain it in a way where it also makes sense from their point of view. And then it's always when you're talking politics and so on, money talks. And working on a business case, I think is really, really important. Showing what would be the cost of no action, what would be the damages that we can expect in Copenhagen, what would be the costs of action, how much money can we actually save by doing something. And also then adding on to the added benefits of having more green and blue and having a more attractive city and so on. If you can put that all into a good business case, then I think that's important. Think of new ways where you can use your existing infrastructure. I think that's also very important, because the double use of things will save you a lot of money. Start working, do all the analysis, have the strategy ready, have the ideas ready. When things actually hit, you can come up and say, okay, this is what we want to do. But you can also use Copenhagen as an example, saying, this is what happened in Copenhagen. This was how disruptive a cloudburst could be in a city where everybody normally says everything works here. What would actually happen if this happened here in our city? How would it affect us? Looking at the vulnerability, you might actually be able sort of to start the discussion and get the attention of the decision makers about what is really going to happen in our city if something happens. And is there anything we can do, even on a small scale, to prevent these things? It can be small things like moving up electrical installations from basements to the first floor. Basic, very, very simple things which doesn't need to cost a lot of money, but can prevent a lot of damage when you have your local climate event.
So, a good impression of what is happening locally.
So yeah, so this is one of the many videos that you will find in there, and they can be, I think, really useful for communication to stakeholders, because I haven't mentioned it explicitly so far, but stakeholder engagement is one of the crucial issues when building resilience, and it's also one of the most difficult things to do, because it is basically in order to get the information that you need, in order to foster buy-in into projects, you have to involve stakeholders, different types of them. The business sector, that can also play a financial role in resilience building. You have to involve local communities because they are hit and they're vulnerable and they know what they need, and in order for the needs to be catered for, they have to have a voice in the process, and you have to involve the researchers because the local researchers, the local universities are the ones that can carry out the research for you and can really, in a debate, indicate the right way of action. So I've just put on a slide some other tools that were produced by the Ramses project. There's a handbook that illustrates how to approach an adaptation process and which are the fundamental steps, a training package with really activities that you can carry out with different stakeholders together, and a slide deck which you can use to involve stakeholders, communicate the results to other people. And there is just quickly another project that I've been part of, which is RAISIN, and this project is about assessing vulnerabilities and also assessing possible adaptation options. And it has produced interesting tools that you might want to consider. One is an impact and vulnerability analysis tool. It's a very interactive tool. You can use it in workshop settings with people, and you can identify together with them what the risks are. Another one is a library of adaptation options. So it's basically not only collecting a lot of adaptation options that are taken from literature and from examples from other cities, but also their effectiveness in specific urban settings. So it gives you also indication on, depending on your setting, what might be most suitable for you. And the third is called the e-guide. It is a decision support system that can be used to track your adaptation process, to see how far you are, to see the steps ahead, and to report on your progress. So I suggest that you have a look if you're interested. I think there's a lot of information there available. So it's just about finding and using it, which is the most difficult thing.
Thank you. Thanks, Alberto. So it seems like Europe really has sort of, made quite a bit of progress in terms of the resilience policies and the strategizing about it. But I'd like to play a little bit of the devil's advocate, right? Because we see here from Copenhagen, right? Copenhagen has more bikers than car drivers, something that's impossible here. One of the greenest cities. And we have also the European Union, which funds it, plus every member state government of the European Union stands behind the Paris Agreement and so on. Obviously, these are not framework conditions that we necessarily have, nor many other countries in the global south have, right? So what are some really sort of some of the issues and problems that cities concretely deal with? I guess aside from, that's lacking cross-sectoral comprehensive thought and maybe some financial problems. Why couldn't we all be Copenhagen over there or here?
Well, I think that being Copenhagen is a matter of planning and vision, because Copenhagen in the 80s didn't have more bicycles than cars. It only had cars, and it had huge car lanes, and there was at the time a very forward-looking political decision maker that decided, no, this is not the way that the city should look like, let's turn it around. I agree to you that Denmark has a very cohesive political system, so there's not been much opposition to that, but still it is about taking great decisions. Of course, if you're not in a context in which there is financing, in which there is support from other tiers of government, your life will be more difficult, but there are, on the other hand, already many cities in the world implementing measures that you can talk to. There are city networks, ICLE is one, but there's C4E, Climate Alliance, and other networks that exactly do that, connect cities with other cities to exchange good practices and talk about mostly problems and solutions. Because I think that what cities mention always as the difficulties, of course, the financing is one aspect, and there it is really about trying to implement no-regret measures first, so doing what you have to do anyway better. Like if you have new infrastructure that is planned, why don't you climate-proof that? The marginal incremental cost of the climate-proofing will be much lower than if you then create an infrastructure and then think about upgrading it, because that's going to cost a lot of money. It's about doing things that contribute to quality of life. I mean, more green infrastructure in a city cleans the air, makes the public space more livable for people. Like it's not expensive to install, so it's something that climate change or not, it is very good to do. So I think that another challenge is about really changing the mindset of policymakers. Like when I was at ICLEI, I talked to a lot of technical people from municipalities, and they said, we're trying to push for this, but the local politicians don't see the immediate advantage of that. They see a cost and they see a risk that this is going to be then objected about by the population, and they don't want to take that risk because their political career is at stake. So it's not about, I don't think it's about also always blaming the politicians, because of course they have electoral terms and they also have to do things that are considered positive by their electorate. But it is about making also them understand that actually if you implement measures that combine short-term and long-term benefits, they can brand themselves also as the champions of resilience and of the champions of good public development, and they can by that be re-elected and like create a long-term good development for the city. So I think it's important that cities talk to each other, that they talk to their stakeholders, that they talk to their politicians. Communication is key, and these are all things that they need support on. And it's very difficult. I mean, I'm not saying that this is easy, and this is also why globally and also at the European level there are not so many cities that are as advanced as Copenhagen. But it's the way forward. It's been done, and so it needs a bold decision. Bold decisions are needed.
Thank you, appreciate it. So, yeah, I still want to ask you a little bit more about some of the cities, right? So what are sort of European cities, aside from Copenhagen, that really are sort of comparable? I know you've been only for 2 days or 1 day here in Miami, but that have sort of similar challenges, right? Are maybe on the coast, and that could be an inspiration for Miami. What are some of those cities?
Yeah, I mean, there's many cities that could be an inspiration, and it's not only about the impacts, because I think that, I mean, except of course coastal flooding, which is something very specific, I think that pluvial flooding, heat waves, is something that is really very common. So it's also about understanding the process of how measures are implemented. I've brought 2 examples with me of 2 cities that I work with. One is the city of Rome, which is also part of the 100 Resident Cities program. And the example of the city of Rome is going to be mostly about the process of understanding what the risks are, because that's where they were in 2015. In a month's time, they're going to publish their resilience strategy, so they're going to then advance. But I want to talk about that process because it's important. And then I'm going to talk about the city of Rotterdam, which is very similar also to Miami, also a coastal and port city. And I'm going to show you some of the amazing things that they've done there. So I kept it for the very end. It's the icing on the cake. For Rome, as I said, I'm a bit emotional about this because in 2015 I spent most of my time in Rome, even though I was still employed in Germany by ICLEI, to support them in after they had been selected for the 100 Resident Cities program in developing the resilience strategy. And basically what we found out when we were there is that the city didn't understand what its risks were and what the weaknesses, the shocks and stresses were. So we had to carry out a stakeholder engagement program to understand those risks. So basically what we did was to organize 7 workshops with different departments and different teams and collecting over 300 participants in total from local businesses to civic associations to ask them what are the problems that you in your daily life affect you concretely, and what are mega trends that you see that are impacting the city, what are also already existing actions that you think are promoted by community groups or the city administration that go into the direction of making the city more resilient. And in order to spread the word even more, we prepared a questionnaire that we attached to free press that you find in subway stations, where citizens could just compile and then put it in each station. There was a small, what do you call it, box that you could throw it into, and it was also shared online, so that we got a lot, really hundreds of questionnaires back and a lot of feedback. And then with the piece of work on critical infrastructure, and already deciding what was critical in the case of Rome was very interesting, because, for example, cultural heritage, cultural infrastructure was one of the most critical ones, even though it doesn't have a function. But what would be Rome without its monuments? Like nothing, would lose everything. And we gathered also their information about risks, and we had these thematic focus groups. And one of the most interesting things about these focus groups was to understand that actors that dealt with a fragment of the same asset, like, for example, in the water infrastructure sector, the people that dealt with the drinkable water, the hydrogeologists that dealt with the river, and so on and so forth, had basically never talked to each other. So like they had done it, but very sporadically. Like there wasn't a consolidated framework for them to exchange on their perceptions of risk on the same asset they're managing. And so there was also a lot of buy-in by these stakeholders, because basically this process provided them with the opportunity to do so for the first time. So it was really, interesting to see what came out of these events. And basically, this priority came out, which have been put in the preliminary resilience assessment that we wrote. Climate change is one of them, but they're all transversal. So basically, they're not like separate. That's why also they are in one circle together, and they are all linked. So what we were able to understand were the links between phenomena that, at a first glance, didn't have any link. Like, what's the link of, I don't know, governance and climate change, participation in climate change, vulnerable populations and climate change and critical infrastructure? We understood that there were a lot of links and also a lot of initiatives that vulnerable populations, civic groups were already self-organizing in order to cope with a situation that they felt the city didn't cope with for them. And that was really very interesting. Now, as I said, next month we will have the resilience strategy, so that we will see which actions have been planned for that. And now let's come to Rotterdam. I've also worked with the city of Rotterdam, especially in 2011 and 12, and then also after that. And it is an amazing case. So just to give you a couple of information. Rotterdam is a coastal city. It's a delta city. It's a port city. So it is a city that is very diverse in terms of nationalities. There are 175 nationalities residing in Rotterdam. That all sounds great, except the fact that all of the parts that are not brown are under sea level in Rotterdam. So the city is very exposed to sea level rise and to climatic changes in general. And also the city is still growing. I mean, it has 600,000 inhabitants, even more. But it is still densifying. This is called the Markthalle, or Market Hall, and it is basically a new development project that combines businesses, a local food market with real estate and living possibilities. It's become one of the landmarks of the city. Now it's finished, this was the project. So this is even contributing to more people going to live in Rotterdam. And the city has a lot of problems traditionally, so it's flooding, with excessive rainfalls, leading also to decreased water quality and to inundated cellars on one hand. On the other hand, there is the drought and the heat. So there are two very different hazards that they have to deal with. And so they said, okay, water seems to be an enemy right now, but wait, no, water equals urban quality. We're built on water. Water is our asset. Like, we have to consider water an asset. And from there they started. So they started in 2001 with a water plan and took the occasion of having to deal with these problems linked to water into an opportunity to then look at their spatial planning, to look at climate change, and now, since they're also part of the 100 Resident Cities program, to look at residents at large. So they, in their climate adaptation strategy, they had this very nice pick, which is about linking adaptation to the environment, to the ecology, to society, and to economy. As to say, protecting our city is not different than thinking about a desirable development of our city, and everything is interconnected. And the principles that they applied were about dividing the city into portions. The city center will be different in terms of characteristics by the port areas, by the suburbs and so on, and then always asking themselves, which measures are good here? What can we do? Which stakeholders should we involve here to make these measures possible? What's the economic value? I mean, Dutch people are very business-minded people, so it's not that they are hippies that want only the common good, they also want to make business out of it. And so who profits from that? And they started, so they said, okay, we need additional water bodies, additional water storage space. So for example, for the outskirts where there is space, they said, let's create more water bodies that serve social purposes. For example, the one on the top right is a rowing lane, but it also provides 4 million cubic meters of water storage. There is nature around them. All of these places are accessible to people, so they can be, they contribute to quality of life, and then when there's a heavy rainfall, there's a space for the water to just not flow into the city. Then the city center, there's no space there, so they said, okay, what do? We have to climate-proof our infrastructure. There was a project about creating an underground parking mall, and what they did was to put water storage under that. So they said, okay, a parking lot as a ramp. Ramps mean space. Why don't we put a water storage tank in that space that otherwise would be unutilized? And the price of doing this, considering the whole price of the infrastructural work, was not much more than it would have been without it. This is a very good example. They said, okay, why don't we also use squares to store water? So they created this square in this neighborhood called Benten, and it's a very nice square. It's used for recreational activities, and it is in a neighborhood that was considered a difficult neighborhood because it was very multi-ethnic, and there were several social problems. And then they said, okay, this square can be used as a water storage tank when there is heavy rainfalls. So it is something that the whole citizenship will profit from when it's normal times, and when it's tough times, it can help us reduce the damage in the city. Same thing they did here. So there is an urban floodplain on this avenue that traditionally was one of the avenues in which the cellars were flooded. And they just created this new urban design with these kind of steps, so you can walk through the beautiful statues when it's good weather, and when it's bad weather, they get flooded, but at least then the water doesn't get to the houses. I mean, this is a very simple measure. It's about like putting some steps and like making it nice and put some infrastructure. It doesn't cost a lot of money, but it protects all of the houses on the two sides. And then again, I mean, the first water square was such a success, and they did another one into the playground, and that's integrated into the playground. Children play on it, and it has the same function of the other water square. But these are very, say, gray infrastructure projects, partially, but also they wanted to have neighborhood projects that were very simple, but that could contribute a lot to well-being. So they have decided, okay, we need green infrastructure. The city is dense, it's sealed. Where do we have space? On roofs. That's unutilized space. So why don't we put gardens on roof? And while doing that, why don't we also combine them with social activities? There's urban gardening going on. Some roofs are like parks that are accessible to people. They also planted like plants in order to restore biodiversity in the city center that cleans the air, and that doesn't cost much. And also they said we have to work in each of the neighborhoods, involving the local population. So for example, this is Soho. It's one of the districts in Rotterdam, and they said let's make it climate-proof. And they're basically doing it step by step. All of the infrastructure that is there, like parking lots or like pavement, like roofs, is being built together with the population step by step. This has become a pilot, and it's been extended to other neighborhoods. And also here, really the important factor is stakeholder involvement and the contribution of the local populations to this. You wouldn't say this by having a first class, but this is a dike. So Rotterdam needs dike to protect itself from sea level and sea level rise, so they need to protect the lower areas. But this could just look completely great if they just plan and implement a normal dike, and they say, okay, we have to do this, otherwise we get flooded, but why not putting some recreational facilities for children and some green infrastructure on it? What's the added cost of that? Exactly, and the concept is about building with nature on the estuary, like greening it, restoring also water quality, which nature does by regulating itself very easily. Then there's some very futuristic pilots. For example, these are the parts of the cities that are out in the outer dike area, and these are floating buildings. So they have that mechanical arm. I've been in the pavilion once. It was a very nice experience, the one on the bottom right. And basically they're able to rise with the tide. When the tide rises, they rise too. Of course, there's only a certain amount of sea level rise that they can take, but they are adapted and they're planning to build in the future maybe districts like that, so that people would actually live there. So I think these are some of the measures that I wanted to show you, and I think that what they show is really that resilience is about, of course, understanding risks and planning in a way that is bold and futuristic, but it's also about just doing simple things that don't cost much, but really having this principle in mind when you look at the whole spectrum of urban planning and of urban development. I think that's important.
Thank you. Thanks. Those are really very good examples, I think. So I want to ask one more question so that you get to ask questions, and we can engage in a little bit of a debate. But so basically, it's clear, right? We need stakeholder engagement from the public and policymakers. We need a strategy to begin with, ideally a comprehensive strategy. We need some local, communal, or national, or supranational financing. And we need some sort of innovative design and technology to bring us there, right? So what are some factors of those that I just mentioned, or others that we have not talked about? Are they more important than others in resilient adaptation of cities, right? Or what are some of the key recommendations that you would give us, the 3 takeaway points that you want to give us, right? Before we get to the question and answer period. Thank you.
So I think the first recommendation that I want to give you is to have patience. Like,
how much time do we only have 20 years?
Like, resilience is a long process. I mean, you saw also all of this was not done in 1 year. Like, it takes time. I mean, have patience, but also act. Like, resilience requires a lot of coordination, a lot of efforts in keeping stakeholders engaged, not only in engaging stakeholders, because that's the easier part. I mean, if you show them these slides and you say Miami can be like that, they first will be enthusiastic, but then the engagement is to be kept up over time, which means that these stakeholders need to see, what's their stake, their role, and also their interest in what is being planned, and they have to see results after a certain period of time. So, and this role, I think it's very important to stress that this role of engaging stakeholders, of driving the process, can only be carried out by city administrations. The private sector has a very important role to play in this, but it is a role in providing technology, innovation, things that the cities need, but that the cities need to decide upon, because they have the responsibility of protecting their citizens. So they have to know what they need and what they don't. Involving citizens is very important, also to make sure that resilience is fair and just for all of the communities. And really, like, I know it's easier said than done, but like, just try and see the opportunities. Like, really, like, greening the city is not a complex endeavor. Like, try to see which areas of the cities that there may be also social issues in which there is segregation, deprivation of the population, could improve naturally by designing a public space for people to come together, to enjoy together, and to feel ownership of that. I think these are really some easy but difficult points that I would like to leave you with.
Thank you for those easy and difficult points. Yeah, now it's basically your... Yes, first of all. really got us on to a right start, but I'm sure that there must be some questions or some comments from you. So we have a cabled mic, so I cannot hand it over to you, but please, if you want to speak up and you quickly want to mention your name, and then please.
My name is Ron Andrew, and first of all, thank you very much for this presentation. Very interesting. But when I look at the fact that we are past the line, we're 1 degree in the flex point where we should be -2, and we've got only 100-odd cities that are in resiliency mode. It's almost futile to have so few cities undertaking such a big task that requires so much. Is there a magic bullet, one thing that you would see that could move people more rapidly to do this? Is there something out there, as radical as it might be?
So I don't want to, maybe I give you a too pessimistic view on this. There are hundreds of cities right now that are doing this. They're not at Rotterdam's level, but already the fact that they are thinking about resilience and that they're thinking about vulnerabilities and thinking about climate change is something that already matters, because that means that maybe not now, but in 10 years they will have policies. Also remember that there might be only hundreds of cities, but as I showed before, like big important cities, there are also the cities that are mostly acting on climate change, since they are, they basically on their territory there are most of the assets, most of the economic activities, most of the population can already have an impact. I don't think there is a magic bullet like that. I think it's a daily, I don't want to say struggle, it's a daily engagement and commitment in raising awareness, in communicating, in like setting a strong political course about city development. And I think that initiatives like the 100 resident cities, but also the global covenant of mayors can help that, because I think that many times in cities, of course, I say administratively everything would be fine, but when there is a change in the political administration, then the next mayor wants to turn things around. And then what I say is, if you join these initiatives, which are long-term commitments that you sign, the issue will be depoliticized in a way. It will just become one of the many administrative process and bureaucratic processes that the city is undergoing and that the new mayor will find already in place. There is international attention put by these initiatives on cities, and there is also international recognition given to the cities that are frontrunners. Rotterdam, Freiburg in Germany, which is the city where I used to live until a couple of months ago, created a whole economic touristic sector of showing their resilience practices. So they created a completely new touristic sector. There's people coming to see that. Yeah, exactly. Sustainable tourism, and so they have also created economic benefits. So, but it's really about showing politicians, because in the end they have to decide what the benefits are for them and for the city, and doing it day by day. But it's a continuous effort, that I have to say.
I'm Tyler. Is adaptation, resiliency, green infrastructure, is it used as a unique selling proposition for a city within Europe? Are there cities that frame it in a business case? And can Miami frame it to be like the North American capital of green infrastructure? Since we have the most assets at risk, can we frame it?
That would be great. Yes, absolutely. And green infrastructure is a business case. Like, that's the point. So the terms resilience and climate adaptation are, when we talk about climatic resilience, the same. Substantially. Nature-based solutions or green infrastructure is a new development that is very much supported by the Commission right now. And basically, it doesn't add up to resilience as such, but it is one of the best ways to achieve resilience. Of course, if you have sea level rise, there's only a certain extent of protection you can get from green infrastructure. But for many other climate hazards, it works and it has a lot of co-benefits. So green infrastructure is exactly one of the features that can help you frame it as a business case for everybody, because if you plan a new development and you put a lot of green infrastructure around it, also the people that will live there can use, that also increases the actual real estate value of that development. So it's a business case also for developers. And so there are a lot of economic considerations that can be made around that. And yeah, I would love you to push. I would love for you to push for that from tomorrow on.
So basically, all of our properties can become waterfront properties in a few years, right? Positively. Thank you.
Yes, hi. My name is Luis Rodriguez, and my question is, based on information that I hear, that I see, that I read, I see a lot of the resiliency strategies that are being implemented for, 2, 3, let's say between 2 and 6 feet sea level rise. And we know today that our CO2 level is around over 400 parts per million in the atmosphere. And as we look back at the geological time, we know that there's, every time that the CO2 level increases, there's two other curves that follow, right? One is temperature, the other one is sea level. And as the CO2 drops, so comes, the temperature and the sea level. And that has been throughout history, correct? And as far as I understand, I've heard 2 different time frames now, but as far as I understand, that one of the last times that we had over 400 parts per million concentration in the atmosphere, our sea level was over 100 feet higher than it is today. And that's where we are today. We're over 400 parts per million in the atmosphere. And now, however, as far as I understand, we reached this level, such a high concentration, in 100 years, while in the past that took thousands of years. So that's my greatest concern. We're looking at 400 parts per million in the atmosphere today, and why aren't we scared enough to be preparing for a much higher sea level increase than we are? Because I see all the proposals just looking at 2 to 6 feet sea level rise. Yeah, that's my concern.
It's a very
I'm scared to death.
valid concern, and that's absolutely it's really my thoughts when I opened. It was my thought when I opened the newspaper and I saw that there was so much disagreement about the Paris Agreement, for example. There is a problem in global leadership, and you're right. The curve of resilience can go like this, but then at a certain point it drops, because if sea level rises too much, there is no levee or dike that can stop that.
Yes.
So at some point when you're underwater, it's all gone. So, of course, resilience is a response to deal with the consequences that we can expect, but the positive thing is that there is a lot of uncertainty, even in the projections that are published by the International Panel on Climate Change, about sea level rise and about the climatic changes. And the reason why there is uncertainty is because it depends on the present political decisions about it. I mean, if globally really we manage to keep climatic changes well below, as they say in the Paris Agreement, the 2 degrees threshold, there is hope. But that requires, again, leadership. It requires coordinated action between national states, and it requires commitment from the biggest emitters. Why some countries are not concerned about that, I don't know. I mean, I know that, like, one answer that I could tell you is that human beings are path dependent, and there is a big pressure from also the fossil fuel producers and so on to keep to a business model that works and has worked so far, but that doesn't take into account all of these externalities. And in certain cases, it's also not because they're evil, but it's because the way that they have managed the risks before didn't include these externalities, so they're not used of thinking in those terms. So what I'm saying is that the reason why I think people are not taking it more seriously, it's because it requires a shift in a paradigm, in a cognitive paradigm, which is slow to make, because as human beings we are used to learn from our experiences. I mean, that's how we as children learn that we shouldn't play with fire. You play with fire once, you get burned, you don't play with it, and that's your path dependency. But then to completely change the framework is much more difficult. And so, yeah, I hope that that globally the issue will be taken seriously and there will be action forward, because otherwise there's not going to be much hope. But we don't know yet.
No, I understand the point. I just understand the point. I guess my concern is that why aren't our resiliency strategies that we're working on right now, like say, even with the 100 resilient cities, why aren't we looking at much higher sea level as opposed to just such a short range of sea level rise increase? That's my concern. And I think we should be planning for much greater impacts and preparing ourselves for a potential, who knows, 20, 30 feet of sea level rise. What are we going to do as a city? Where are we going to go? That's what I was talking about.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know the local situation, but what I see in cities is that the complex problem is deciding for which level of risk you are going to prepare. Because of course, the more you increase the level of risk, the more you need a lot of money to build a huge infrastructure. So you have to always have a balance between what is bound to happen, what could happen, and what is very unlikely to happen. And it's always a gamble, because you don't know. I mean, you could have a very bad climatic event tomorrow, and it could happen in 100 years. You don't know that. You know that it's bound to happen if you don't do anything, but you don't know when. So for policymakers, of course, it is always very sensible to make investments, because if they spend a lot of money and then nothing happens, there can be somebody that says, wait a minute, why have we spent all of that money on that and that was not even needed? So I think that the reason why that is happening is because it's difficult in general for cities to justify and to pin down, okay, this is the level of risk that we're going to prepare for.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, we have time for one or two more questions.
Yeah, my name is Alberto. I guess a couple of questions for you. In your, as an expert, right, in this field. So, Miami Beach is spending about $300 million by elevating the street and building the ponds. I had an interesting conversation actually with a Dutch urban planner talking about the difference between what is happening in the Netherlands versus here because of the porous limestone, right, that both Miami and actually the whole South Florida is built upon. So really the measurements, like I was impressed by seeing what Rotterdam is doing, but I couldn't see that happening here because we can dig, below a parking lot to create, this containers for life, for the water. So what do you see for a city like, Miami Beach, where we have overdevelopment on the coastal areas, so that is one issue. We have water seeping through, whether you're living on the coast or not, you're essentially going to be underwater. What do you see in this, what I would call Band-Aid solutions, which is elevating the streets by 2 or 3 feet and the pumps? I mean, I don't see the longevity in them. I understand why they're doing it. What would you see as a better way for the cities to prepare, if there is any? Because I'm sure a lot of people have been thinking about this.
Yeah, I mean, of course, one level of the answer is that I would have to know the local situation, the local technical data much better to propose spot-on measures. But what I want to say in general is that, of course, Miami has to find its own approach. But then the question is, when they elevated the streets, did they also plan for green infrastructure along those streets to also absorb part of the water, slow down runoff? Yes or no? And if they didn't, this is something that could have been done at the point in which the infrastructure was upgraded. And I think that the solutions as that we see in Rotterdam didn't exist before they thought about them. So of course, Miami, having a different situation, will have to think about tailored solutions that would fit the local context. And those solutions are to be found together with the researchers, with the business partners, maybe with support by also companies from around the world that have expertise, and have to be tailored, because solutions that are infrastructurally very heavy always have to be tailored. The fact that you might not see them right now doesn't mean that they don't exist. That they don't exist, maybe, but maybe they can be found together, and that's what I think every city that has to undergo this process have to find for themselves, and to assess the risks and to see which solutions would be viable. But I think that the devil is in the process, is not in the measures as such, because I cannot say that I am sure, but I'm very positive about the fact that if a process were to be implemented about finding those measures, about involving the research sector, involving the private sector, maybe they're doing it. I mean, I know that they are doing it. The Miami is doing it through the involvement in the One Resident Cities process. So I am confident that that will lead to other solutions to be found that are better suited for Miami. But I think it's not about like being discouraged up front, but it's about trying to find new solutions and new ideas for different sectors.
Thank you. Yes, we have 2 more questions, and then we should go to the reception. Please, ladies.
My name is Anna Manikowska. You mentioned at the beginning of your presentation that in Europe you have about 50% of the population living in, 70% living in cities, 50% worldwide. That number is bound to increase, as we know. So that's one thing. And the second thing is that you mentioned the investments that are needed for cities to build resilience over time. So what I can see if I project myself in the future is, first of all, migration increasing to the cities, and also cities that are well adapted and others that are not as well adapted. And so you'll have migration from these climate unproof cities onto these new cities that will be much more resilient. When you plan for resilience, do you take that into account in your planning process, that the amount of people and the population density will increase in, let's say, 20, 50 years due to that migration, and due to the fact that this particular city is so well adapted that everybody wants to live in it? And it will change, obviously, the demographics and the pressure and everything. I'm curious about that.
Yeah, certainly you take into account the demographic pressure and the macro trends that impact. I mean, now I know that you have a lot of climatic refugees that came here from Haiti after the hurricanes and so on. And in Europe, we have a lot of refugees coming from Syria to Europe right now, which is, I mean, they're not coming for a climate-related event, but still, it's a pressure on cities. You have to take into account, of course, demographic developments and how much the city wants to grow and which kind of demographic weight it can carry. On the other hand, there are, again, uncertainties, because I mean, we see right now that some cities are very well adapted and some are not, but we don't know how the situation is going to look like in 10 years. That depends, again, on political decisions. If there is an investment in this, if there is bold political decision making in this, at many levels, global, European, regional, in the world, the situation may look different. Of course, it is also, again, about fighting climate change. So investing in renewable energy, energy efficiency, and reducing CO2 emissions, because that is really the key point. If you don't do that, then of course resilience alone is not enough. But I also think that there will be more and more migrations due to climate change, to climatic changes, and to the loss of resources in certain countries, and depletion and so on. But cities can plan for that up to a certain extent, because of course it is the responsibility of national governments to think about these trends. Cities have to think about how they will deal with the consequences of these phenomena, but it's not their job, and they don't have the authority to make sure this phenomenon doesn't happen. That's the national level to do, and that's why the national-local interface is so important. So my answer is yes, but there is a lot, you have to take that into account, but there is a lot of uncertainty, and that should not be forgotten, because otherwise you also risk taking things for granted that then are not going to happen the way that they are. I mean, if you just think about Back to the Future, this movie from the 80s that I love and watched it like 10 different times, and now they imagine the future to be right now. I mean, they didn't imagine the internet because they didn't have any indication that would happen. They imagined flying cars. I've seen none. They imagined these cool Nikes that would like lace themselves automatically. So it's also about that some risks we can foresee, and we can see that they are bound to happen, or they're very likely to happen. About some things we don't know, because we look at the future from this perspective. So it's also about understanding where it is good to act and what we still don't know. I think that's the balance.
Thank you. And then last but not least, Christine Kelly.
And because this episode of Mr. Terenzi for presentation. Really, it's a pleasure to follow you. We want to know over there. Just a positive comment about the resources of the European Union. And as you mentioned, of course, under the Horizon 2020, so you have a lot of resources. In the room, you have different experts, very important for the university in sea level rise, water. They are expecting some support from the European Union, of course, and from the community, we have the Chamber of Commerce, some consultants who are really interested in that. So we want to say again that the European Union is here. This is one of the first priority, the climate change, under the Horizon 2020 through the 2 years. And there are still some opportunities now to apply. I would say it's very important, some help. And we have the experts here in America who want to become some partners in resilience, in climate change, in water. So just want to say that, and if you can say just a little word of that to help them. Thank you.
Sure. Sure, I mean, there are calls out there for Horizon 2020 in which also cross-continental cooperation is wished. There's a lot, there's with US, there's a lot with China. So what I think that if somebody is not familiar with the Horizon 2020, looking at the website and seeing all the specifications can be a bit confusing. So you might feel dizzy. So, like, be sure that you're sitting when you do that the first time. But then if you read through the requirements, it is really about understanding what the strategic objective of a certain call for action is, and so understanding what the European Commission expects in terms of result, and then really understanding, since all the projects are carried out by consortia, so there is a consortia that has to be built by different organizations, which contribution you might give to a potential consortium that would try to tackle the challenge that is in the call for application, and start looking for partners that could be good in covering the other bits. I think that in the end, it's really about finding the right angle to tackle the challenges that are there, and it's really about partnering. So I think that you need strong partners in Europe. So definitely I can advise to be in touch with European research centers, universities, cities, and so on and so forth, and to discuss and really try to build a strong consortium, because it's very important. And of course, write a strong book. That's very important.
Thank you again, Alberto. Wonderful job. I think we learned quite a bit in a little over an hour. Thank you very much for coming. Alberto is a freelance consultant now. Maybe some of you want to work with him. That's just I wanted to mention. Here's his email address for any future references. Now we also have, thanks to the European Union, a small reception prepared here in the adjoining room. But before we do so, if we could please ask you to quickly fill out some of our just 4 or 5 questions about the evaluation of this event, which is also part of our EU grant assessment process. So thank you very much for your interest. And lastly, before we head over, and I'm sure Alberto can answer any other question that you may have, this is part of a 2-year Getting to Know Europe grant by the European Union. So we plan to bring in the fall our next resilience speaker, which will be focusing more on socioeconomic resilience. So the impact of the sharing economy, of inequality in the areas, in the labor markets. So stay tuned for that. Like I said, if you're interested, I'm sure you can supply your email in the evaluation sheet. Thank you very much, and I hope we'll see you.